special guest in Eric G. Is that how I pronounce it, Eric?
Yeah, like a
Yeah,
gangster.
yeah, cool. Yeah, love it. Love that. Can you tell people a little bit about yourself and what you're all about, please?
Well, I'm a life and writing coach, and I know when I always explain this, like people are like, those are two different things. And I got into it because I was first a writing coach because that's like my background. That's what I studied. I studied screenwriting, and as I was trying to teach people how to write, I realized that the one hang up or the one big thing that I wanted to focus on, but it was really difficult, was finding their voice. And I think you can only know your own voice if you know yourself. And so that's where the life coaching came in, and it really kind of morphed into that a little bit. So where I find people hiring me to teach their kids how to write, and it becomes teaching them who they are. And so that's what I do. And I kind of specialize in personality types and understanding people's personality. I studied that for a long time too. I owned an education company for about a decade, and that's what I did. And I kind of tested out my methodology, and I ended up writing a book on it. And that's kind of what I'm doing now, is talking about my book and, trying to get people to read it, because I think it's a really cool thing that'll help a lot of people. And it got published like about 6 months ago. It's called The Power of Personality.
Love that. Love that. I've had a lot of guests on, funnily enough, in recent months who have started off as personal trainers or coaches in some aspect of maybe just business, but they all tend to spill over into that life coaching area, because I think it's probably a more holistic approach, and it's probably more what people can need and buy into. It's not just that one thing that they need. It's a little bit of everything, to be honest, and that helps them learn whatever it is that you're trying to teach them and develop, really.
Yeah, I guess it's like, when doctors, probably doctors feel that same way, right? When they're like helping their patients, you can only deal with symptoms so long when you're like, at the end of the day, like, really, I just want to teach you to be a healthy person. So maybe you should do a few more push-ups. Maybe you should eat a little less fried food, and they kind of go into like the more holistic approach anyway, right? And I feel like that's the same thing with most things in life. We're like, okay, we're working on this, but really it would really help if we also worked on this. This is super important, and it'll help your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the book itself, do you cover, the life coaching stuff as well in the book, or is it just...
Yeah, a lot of my stories, the way I introduce my personality typing methodology. So really the book is basically teaching people how to type other people. But I like to use practical examples and context, because I think theory, people can get kind of lost in theory. And also it's not really something that people connect to. Like no one's going to go, oh, like theoretically someone is like this and this other person is like this. And if you leave it at that, people will be like, okay, that's cool. But if you tell them, hey, you know that guy who acts like this all the time when you're in school, and they always, when you get into a group assignment, they're like the bossy one and they're telling everybody what to do. That's this person. And I think everyone's like, I know that guy, or I know that girl. I know who that person is. So basically my book uses a lot of life context, and a lot of those come from my own life coaching people or working with people. And I try to use as many real world examples as I can so that people can kind of connect to that.
Okay. What's the benefit of kind of personality typing people then? What's the upside?
There's lots of benefits. I think the number one thing that I get asked, I don't know if it's like the number one benefit, but people always like, who should I hook up with, right? Like who's the person that I should, like go home with at the bar? And I'm always just like, like at the end of the day, it's more about understanding people's strengths and weaknesses, and that both of those things are derived from each other. And I think if you're okay with conflicting with this person this way, then I think then that's good. That's what it pretty much teaches you. Like you're going to have this archetypal conflict with this type of personality, and just be okay with it and accept it. But you can't try to change them, because if you try to change them, obviously that's clearly unhealthy and it's probably damaging for both of you. And then also probably the most important thing is kind of realizing that whoever you are, whatever your personality type is cool. It's okay to be that, and like to kind of like figure out what makes you really happy, as opposed to what people are telling you should make you happy.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely massive, to be honest, is understanding yourself. And I think it's a journey I've been on over the last, well, probably all my life, to be honest, but really focused on over the last sort of probably 3 years, I'd say. And learning who I am and understanding myself a bit more has really helped me just be happier, be more at peace with myself and content, and, understand where, almost let myself off the hook a little bit for my weaknesses, and and just sort of appreciate my strengths a little bit more.
Right. I mean, it could be your personality type. There's a personality type that really does, that's like their number one priority is self-knowledge. And I always like to say, I call that personality pack shamans. And I always say, like, shamans don't have a midlife crisis because their whole life is a midlife crisis, right? They're always just like, am I doing the right thing? I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I think a lot of times there's another pack that makes up the majority of people, and like their values are impressed on a lot of others. So for the most of their life, they're like, yeah, I'm doing the right thing because that's what I've always been told to do. And it works. And everyone seems to be agreeing with it. But then they get to that point, like in their 40s, where they're just like, wait a minute, I got to like re-examine this. And there goes the midlife crisis, right? But I think for other personality types, our whole lives are like that, but that's good. That's healthy, because that shows you kind of connected early on. You're like, hey, this is what I really want to do, like figure out about myself.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And like I say, I don't like to tell people my age, Eric, but I'm 39 now, so it's took me a while to get there. A lot of the time, I was that person that just conformed with what everybody else expected of me and kind of fit in that box that everybody puts you in. And it's only sort of the last few years that I've gone, right, enough of that. It's because it's not making me happy. It's making me miserable, if anything. So, understanding myself is actually bringing me peace and allowing me to just live and be free, really.
Yeah, and don't worry about your age because you're younger than I am. So I'm 44. So, you got me by at least like half a decade, so. But
I never guessed that.
Oh, really? Oh, well, I act like a little kid. So I think that's how I try to stay as young as I can, as I act like a 12-year-old. I'm very consistent.
Too. I'm going for the Peter Pan approach.
Yeah, and I wanted to guess you're 39. So, like that, it works, right? And so I was going to type you because I was just from saying that, like when you were talking about like, you're trying to conform, but then realize that wasn't really what you wanted. Not to get all wonky and everything, but in the shaman pack, there are 4 different kind of personalities types. And I use animals. That's why I obviously call them packs. And I had a question. If you'd like me to try to figure out what your personality type is, what your animal type is. Can I ask a question?
That, yeah.
Were you a good student?
No, that depends. So I was good in as far as I was attentive in class. And I would, I wouldn't misbehave in class, but I'd probably get a little distracted, but not deliberately. But then when I was at home, I wouldn't do it like homework and stuff. Really, really not my thing.
And were you more of a class clown or were you more of a daydreamer?
Probably more of a daydreamer, really. I probably developed into a little bit of a class clown towards the end of my school years, just because it's cool to fit in and all that kind of thing, isn't it? But but that's kind of probably towards the end of my school years, really.
Interesting. I mean, my first guess would be like a humpback whale. And I know I'm just saying this random animal. People are like, what the heck is that? But basically a humpback whale is like the daydreamer type. They don't fit in. They might try to fit in. And obviously that's like a bit of a conflict, right? I asked the good student question because other types that are similar in a lot of ways, I call them pandas, giant pandas, but they tend to be like, if I ask the good student question, they'd be like, yeah, I was a good student. They're a little bit more, for lack of a better term, behaved in school. Not to say that you were misbehaved, but like you said, like kind of floated around. And when you went to school back home, you weren't like, oh, what's my homework? I got to do my homework. And we're like, I don't know, what was I supposed to do again? So.
Yeah. When I got home, I was either playing computer games or going out and, playing with my friends and stuff like that. Zero interest in doing the schoolwork afterwards.
It's Harry Potter. Harry Potter's humpback whale, and they always said like, even when Daniel Radcliffe was trying out for the role and they all gave them like an assignment to write about their character. And they said that they almost all matched their character because I think Emma Watson, like she did like a 10-page report or something, just like Hermione. And then Daniel Radcliffe like forgot about it, I did like 1 page and threw it away, but
yeah, that'd be me. That'd be me. Tell me a little bit more about that personality type then, because I'm intrigued now. Intrigued.
Like, so I always go with the core value, right? That's the difference, I think, with my personality typing methodology versus others is that, a lot of times people focus on the external. And I was always taught like by my dad, who's like, yeah, it's good to focus on what people are on the outside. And you should always figure out what they do. But what's more important is why they do it, right? Like if you're an author, we have like tons of different authors in history even. And like, you can't say that Hemingway is the same as Tolstoy, right? Because you can you probably tell like they're writing for different reasons, and you can just tell basically reading their books. You're like, okay, this is very different than this one. Like Old Man and the Sea is very different than Anna Karenina, right? So like if you just focus on what a personality's core value is, I think that's kind of a better way to discern what someone is. Because oftentimes our core values, we tend to assume that other people value that same thing, but I've found in my experience that we don't. So for your humpback whale, you're part of the shaman pack, and the shaman pack prioritizes, like I said before, self-knowledge. Because not everyone prioritizes that, right? You could meet I'm sure you met tons of people. You're like, wow, you never really thought about what you wanted to do and what it meant and how you were feeling about that. And you're like, no, I just kind of want to have fun and just do stuff, that I like, or I just want to feel safe and have a family and a home where I can feel secure in. And that goes with the other packs, right? Each one values safety and security, one values excitement, another one values information. And I think those four things those three things along with self-knowledge are very different. So yeah, you would be the self-knowledge prioritizer as a shaman.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense to me actually, because there's a lot of people who are kind of content with life and just getting on with stuff, and I've always been confused by that, because that's never been me really. I've always struggled with that kind of just being content with where I'm at, and always looking for answers or looking for more really.
Yeah, I have a lot of students like that, and I think my knowing about personality really helps me in terms of I can't really push them too hard, because obviously that everyone needs to reflect a little bit, but knowing about different personalities, it makes me realize at least that I can't push them too hard, just because I might think that they should want to reflect more than they actually do. I have to go carefully around that and kind of encourage them kind of in I don't say a manipulative way, but in a slower fashion. But yeah, knowing that, if you know that, then it's kind of cool, because it kind of justifies any doubts or insecurities that a shaman might have felt when they were younger, right? Because there's not that many shamans. Maybe they make up about 8% of the population, around that. So, that's pretty small. And when another type or another pack makes up about half the population, like I said, their values get impressed on a lot of us. And when you think, when you watch anything, what gets impressed? You should go to school, behave, get good grades, so you can get a good job, so you can go to good college, get a good college, so you get a good job, and then get married, have a family, and buy a house, and blah, 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 blah. Which I'm not saying not everyone can like that, and everyone can want to do that, but for a gatherer, that almost becomes impressed on them at an early age that that's what they should be doing, and they will want to do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually as well to me, because I've struggled for a lot of my life to find kind of like-minded people, if you know what I mean. Everybody around me just kind of happy, content, just getting on with stuff, and I'm just I feel like there's something wrong with you sometimes. You know what I mean? So it's your family is just happy, getting on with it. It's telling you should be happy and getting on with it. Oh, you've got a good job, you've got this, but I'm just always just searching for something.
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly what a shaman does. And then obviously the humpback whale is a specific subset of that. And I think in general, if it makes you feel better too, those people who don't reflect and aren't searching, and they are happy, and I'm putting that in air quotes, aren't really obviously as happy as they can be, because clearly they haven't reflected on what really makes them happy. And that's where the midlife crisis comes in, right? Where then they're like, oh my gosh, I've never wanted to be an accountant. Why am I an accountant? And I'm not picking on accountants, but that's kind of the job that a lot of them take, or something very safe and secure, 9 to 5, and then they start really trying to examine what they really want out of life.
Yeah, it's probably not a great position to be in, but it's one of those things. I think we kind of get impacted by our environment and by the people around us when we're younger, and kind of push down a path, and it might not be the right one for, maybe it is, maybe it's not, but the sooner we can find our own path and our own journey, the better, rather than trying to please other people really and keep other people happy by doing what they think we should do.
Yeah, and I'm always encouraging people like I love the title of the show, They Not Like Us, right? There are people out there that are going to be like you. You might not be around them wherever you are, but they are because it depends. I used to play in a pickup basketball game, and probably 95% of the personality types were dissimilar to mine, because playing in a pickup basketball game every week, it kind of fits a certain personality type, right? But now I own a creative space here in LA. It's a shared creative workspace, And there are a lot of personalities that are like shaman types, right? People who are trying to find themselves, try to express themselves creatively. So it's kind of weird. Like if you find your certain niche, then you can find a lot of people who are going to be probably pretty similar. And it just makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, this podcast has helped me. I've had quite a lot of people who are on similar journeys, or I've gone through similar things, and people I can relate to. So it's quite nice in that sense. I can kind of reach out and meet people who are always probably not all the same all the time, but quite similar, and that will have similar traits in that they are after that self-improvement, or they're trying to help others find that self-improvement.
Yeah, that is a shaman kind of priority, right? It's not just self-knowledge. Obviously, self-knowledge is the number one thing, knowing about themselves, but obviously wanting to help other people learn about themselves, right? And I think, yeah, I mean, if you're talking to a lot of coaches, you're probably talking to a lot of shamans. I mean, literally the term shaman is like, a spiritual teacher, right? Or like leader. And yeah, it kind of fits, right? And it's cool because that's why we have the packs, but then you're a humpback whale type within the pack because there are 3 other animal personality types within that pack. So you probably met people who you are on a similar wavelength, but they might go about it differently, right? Someone might be a little more like community organizer type, and I think that's kind of cool too, right? Because we can see that there are certain people that are really similar to us, but we all have our differences as well.
Yeah, I like that. What about schools then? So like obviously we're talking about helping people and stuff now. So what about schools? What can they do to help people kind of have a better understanding of who they are and to develop in these ways? Because from my experience and understanding, schools kind of also kind of force you into that box, whereas you will conform, you'll all be the same, you'll all do this. Whereas, we acknowledge that everybody's, slightly different, has different personalities or types or traits. But a lot of schools are not really encouraging that or embracing that.
Yeah, like I mentioned the Gatherer pack again, that makes about half the population. If they make up about half the population, they make up probably about 80 to 85% of elementary school teachers. Right? It just makes sense. If your priority is safety and security and giving it to other people, that's great, right? School should be a safe place, right? It should be a place where people can feel secure so they can learn about different rules of society that if we follow, then, we can at least know we're on the right path, right? But obviously the difficulty becomes then that's only about half the population. And then what are you going to do with, the other packs? Like a third of people fall into the hunter pack, and hunters love excitement. So every kindergarten teacher knows about half the class is going to like just sit there politely and listen to the teacher, and about a third of them be running around, like just grabbing things, throwing things, and like discovering that way, right? So what do you do about that? Those kids, right? And those kids tend to not particularly like, I guess, organized traditional school. And so that was a long roundabout way of saying, I don't necessarily know if I have an answer logistically, right? Because, I get it. Like generally people will go towards the majority. And if you have a class, it's really hard to set up a system where everyone is treated individually. Even though that would be great. That's the ideal. But, when I owned my education company, we worked with kids on an individual basis. So at the very least, I could teach my teachers that, you need to understand what they are so you can adjust your own bias towards them, because you're going to probably prioritize this, but they might prioritize this. And in talking to them, you got to talk to kids differently, right? So a lesson I always like to give them is, like I mentioned, the hunter pack, right? They love excitement and, they love moving around and doing like taking risks and taking a lot of chances. So yeah, when they grow up at their strongest, they're going to be the people who are like fighter pilots, athletes, firefighters, SWAT team members, people who have to make adjustments on the fly. But if you get them as a kid, and if you're a teacher and you're saying, be careful, and you keep telling them to be careful all the time and to not do those chances, then when they get older and the stakes are higher, they're not going to be able to do that. So I guess at the end of the day, I think if we teach our teachers to react to kids on an individual basis, like for those kids, I would always tell my teachers, tell them to concentrate or tell them to focus as opposed to be careful. Because I know your instinct as someone who prioritizes safety and security is to say, be careful. But they're not going to like hearing that, because you tell them to be careful, you're telling them that everything that they have confidence in, which is like to take chances and like adrenaline seeking, is not the right thing, and they're wrong. But if you tell them to concentrate, you're basically saying it's okay for you to take chances, but when you do, like really focus. It's okay to juggle chainsaws, but make sure you're focusing when you do. So sorry, that was a long answer, but essentially, yeah, I think if we teach people to treat and look at everyone differently, at least on a personal basis, I think teachers would be or students would be better served.
Yeah, do you think it would be worthwhile for teachers to have that kind of training to be able to learn and understand personality types? Because I don't think they do at the minute. They just take kids and just get on with the curriculum, really.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess it's a safer route. I think that's the whole idea is like this is like the safe and secure route to do it. And it's a little like have you seen Dead Poet Society? The
Yeah.
movie Dead Poets? Yeah, that is the shaman movie of all shaman movies. I mean, it does make gatherers look pretty bad because all the bad guys in there or the antagonists are gatherers, right? They're like the teachers and the strict principal and like the rigid dad who's like not aware of his kid. And almost all the heroes and kids in that movie are shamans. So like if you can tell, like that's the conflict they have, right? Like and then they have, of course, the shaman teacher. And he's like a breath of fresh air, right? Robin Williams comes in and he's like, no, you got to find yourself. Like, forget about what they're telling you, and it's like a breath of fresh air for all the shamans. And of course, that comes into conflict with the school system, and thus, well, obviously, tragedy happens. But that is a great story, and probably the best indicator of that style, that shaman style of education versus the gatherer style.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually. And to be honest, there's a lot of movies really that focus on it's always the heroes or the people that tend to be the heroines essentially are the ones that usually a little bit different, a little bit outside, aren't they, for whatever reason. I don't know if that's because in the movie industry there's probably more creative people potentially who kind of think that way, or who were outsiders themselves potentially, but it does seem to be that way.
Yeah, I guess it's an instant conflict, right? I guess back in my screenwriting days, like they always said, conflict first for your script. What's the conflict? And so if you take a fish out of water or someone who is not, I wouldn't say weaker, but maybe like in society weaker, then there's immediate conflict from the minority to the majority, right? Even though I don't want to say gatherers can't be heroes. Like they tend to be like Superman. Superman is a gatherer. Clearly, safety and security is his number one value. Captain America, same thing. If anyone's seen Saving Private Ryan, Tom Hanks' character, total gatherer. So like it's cool. And then hunters are also really heroes quite a bit. They're like the action heroes. They're like the ones like Batman or something. They're the ones who are like always adjusting and they're like the cool person. Shaman characters are never cool. They're always like Harry Potter.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that's probably something to do with that kind of personality type feeling a bit outside really of the main herd almost.
Oh yeah, that's very true. And then there's the Smiths, who are like I want to say nerds, but they probably would call themselves nerds because they would think that being a nerd is totally fine. And that's like the other minority type, for lack of a better term. I use minority, but like they make up about 8% of the population too, like the shamans, but they focus on information. So as opposed to shamans who are always trying to discover themselves and find out about themselves, Smiths are like Hermione Granger. They're kind of like the type who's like, no, I just want to know everything I can about the world, because it's for her, it's because she wants to move ahead and she's ambitious. But for other Smith types, it might just be they like information and they're just like to collect it, and so they also kind of have that, like you were saying, like they have this feeling that they're different, but as opposed to shamans, they don't try to fit in. They're just more like, yeah, I'm different, and those people are idiots, so I'm just gonna like stay over here and be my smart self, So they also have problems, right? Because they can be like the recluses, the people who are very off-putting. People think they're insensitive. So once again, there's that. But everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any sort of common myths about sort of personality types or, common misconceptions that you come across?
Like the number one thing, and I wouldn't call it a myth, I would call it a simplification, is the whole introversion, extroversion thing. I think a lot of people mention it. There's a lot of books on it. And I think people very quickly go to it because, oh yeah, I'm an introvert. Like all it takes is someone who's kind of shy and maybe not always comfortable in every social situation. And like, yeah, I'm introverted. And then it makes them feel good, right? Which is okay. But I do think that's an oversimplification, right? Like you could take the most shy, reserved person. Like let's say, like a humpback whale. Sometimes humpback whales can be shy and reserved. Right. But if they feel really strongly about something, like a strong principle that they have, they will go out in front of people. They will preach. They will like sacrifice themselves. They will be the martyr, kind of like Harry, Potter, like they would just go out there and be a leader, So I think it's all more about context. And I think oftentimes when people have argued with me and said, oh, personality types are dumb because, I'm introverted sometimes and I'm extroverted sometimes. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I totally agree. So it has to be contextual. And so once again, I think that's why it's an oversimplification. It has to do with what we prioritize. If it's something you value, you're going to be more outgoing and more aggressive with it. And if it's something that you don't prioritize, then you'll probably just be like more deferential, right? So that's probably one of the biggest myths I can think of, or over simplifications. Birth order. Birth order is definitely a myth. I think birth order is kind of bullshit. Because and this is my feeling with birth order, because 50% of the population are gatherers, and gatherers like safety and security, and what makes you safe and secure, like an authority structure. So half the time, the oldest child is going to be a gatherer, and that means that they will fall into what we think of now as what the older sibling does, right? They're going to be parentified. They're going to be the responsible one. They're going to take care of their younger siblings because that's their duty. But the other half of the time, you're not going to get a gatherer, so they're not going to do that, So I think birth order is just because so many people see gatherers as older siblings, so they're like, oh yeah, well, of course they do that. But hey, as someone who did not have a gatherer as an older sibling, I had a hunter. My older sister's a hunter, and she was just like, F off. I don't care about taking care of y'all. Like, I'm just going to go do my thing. Just stay away from me. This is my space, and you're going to stay out of it, So it's just very different.
Yeah, I like that. And the introvert thing is quite interesting, actually. I think I had a conversation recently about that because I've been seen by other people as an extrovert a lot, but I feel introverted a lot of the time. A lot of the time, I'm not, I'm not up to big social events, or especially if there's multiple people there. I dread them, and it takes a lot of energy out of me. But like you say, if there's something I'm really, really interested in, I'm not afraid to step up and to take it on, or to be in front of a group to talk. And I know I can do it. It just depends on the setting, really, what the reason behind it, and whether or not I've got the energy then to do it, because my energy levels have kind of wane depending on what it is. If it's just a pointless social gathering, then I struggle with that, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of that. Like I always say, the person who is extroverted because they go up in front of people and they say a speech that's very meaningful to them, like that's very inspirational, that person is very different than the extroverted person who goes on a bar in Cabo and does body shots. Like those are very different motivations, and partying. Yeah, like if you're a shaman, like that kind of partying, going to a club or whatever, and like just being around a lot of people, it's not that appealing, right? Because for a shaman, that's on the outside. That's like visceral sensation, right? And shamans aren't totally into that. They're more into like the coming from inside, right? Like, am I inspired? How do I feel? What is my spiritual like energy that I'm feeling right now? And then of course, I'm sure you felt that when you feel really inspired, and then you go up and you're not even thinking about like being in front of people because you're just so focused on how motivated you are and then how enthusiastic you are. Whereas other types, specifically hunters, they want the stuff coming from the outside. Like they would want to go to a club, be around people. That really energizes them, being around people, because it's all like information coming in, stimulus coming in, or stimuli, it's very different. I guess it's the difference between being enthusiasm versus excitement. And I think shamans are more keen to enthusiasm. And like, let's say a hunter would be more keen to excitement.
Yeah, I like that. 'Cause I had a conversation recently about birthdays and how I don't like to celebrate my birthday, because I don't mind celebrating other people's birthdays and going to like functions or parties or whatever. But if it's me, I don't want a birthday party or a function because I don't like to be the center of attention. But I don't mind being there, around the outside. But I don't like being, because I feel like if I'm the center, then everything's on me. I can't leave, and I just feel that pressure.
Yeah, and I guess it's also I don't know if this is true, but is it like sometimes it's like the formality of it. Sometimes with formality, I don't want to say it feels unearned, but really, let's face it, a birthday is kind of unearned because, we all get birthdays. You'd be a terrible, Adolf Hitler had a birthday, right? Like you'd be the most horrible person and you still get a birthday, right? Like it's not like, whereas
what I always tell people is it's my mother's achievement, not mine.
That's actually hard, right? Yeah, right. For your mom, that's like, yeah. And they probably have like, depending, I don't know how many siblings you have, but I know my mom had 3 of those, so That yeah, that's actually a good one. That's a good line. Yeah, it's the mother's achievement, you know. So maybe it's like I'm also a shaman, and formality always kind of like makes me a little uncomfortable too, which is weird because I could go up and say a speech if I really feel it, or like I don't want to say preach, but essentially, yeah, sometimes I can get preachy, but you know, I could go up in front of people and talk, you know, like if I'm just going off the cuff and I just like thinking of something that's really meaningful and I'm just like just communicating. But then like really random things, like just formal things where I'm not even doing anything, like graduation or just walking, you know, I don't like I'm not particularly comfortable with, right? And I think a lot of shamans can feel that same way, where they're just like, oh, like I don't really know, I love this, like kind of like this seems very stilted, you know. But other types love it, so all power to them.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think I just prefer that off the cuff, more natural kind of stuff, you know. Whereas, yeah, I don't like the formal events. It all feels a little, even when it's not, it just feels a little forced to me sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, you know, and once again, I'm not picking on gatherers, but they're a great explanation of things. Gatherers make up half the population, and when you like safety and security, formality gives you that, right? There's a certain sense of certainty, like you know that you're doing the right thing or the right method or process, and they love process. And you know, I think anything that's formal is a process. So when you go through those hoops, it makes them feel more like they're contributing to the greater safety of society.
Yeah, is that more like, would you say that's more like a type A type personality? Is that a thing? Type A personality? I don't know whether people are really structured and organized. Is that kind of
You know, I always say like it depends on the gatherer. Like I always say, stags have the world made for them, and a stag is one personality type, like a subset of the gatherer type, and they are the more, I hate to say bossy, but they will come off as bossy, but they're very aggressive, right? And if you're a male stag in our world, the world is made for you, right? You've been taught you are in command. Whatever you do is right. You be confident because your values are the right values, and you need to like get people to follow those. That's like the mindset they have, and they're told that, and then they go out, and then you know that. So that would probably be the typical Type A personality, like very aggressive, very certain. But of course, the downside of that is they never are taught to self-reflect, right? They're never taught like, oh, maybe like there are things that you want that are different than what you're told. So they would be the most likely to have like a midlife crisis and buy like a Porsche, you know, when they're 40 or something, because they never really got to have fun because they were just doing what they were told. So I mean, that would be the worst case scenario for a stag. But yeah, I would say like that stag personality type would definitely be categorized as a Type A.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a type A. I'm far away from that because yeah, I'm very chaotic. I would say all over the place a little bit.
You know, the funny thing is the humpback whale, your type would be actually theoretically is the polar opposite of the stag. So there you go. Like you're literally like that, you know, like, and they would also, if you met stags, which I'm sure you have, I'm sure you met tons of them, they would put you off very easily.
Yeah, they can do. I've learned, especially if I'm sort of working with one, actually, to that actually kind of really offset and help my skill set. You know, there's a bit of management to be done with that kind of, you know, relationship, but as long as you get that right, it can actually really help it, you know, in work environments or getting things done.
Yeah, I mean, once again, if we can understand each other's strengths and weaknesses and understand where people are coming from. I mean, obviously, I mentioned the romantic angle because that's what everyone always asks for. But really, when it comes to work, and I have like helped companies like work with their teams of people so that they can get along better, and that's a big thing. Like you said, like what are my strengths? What is this person's strengths? And how can we help each other? Versus focusing on our different value system and we just got to accept that we have different values. Yeah, I guess it's like politics. Just don't talk about that. Like so things like when you're in the work environment, don't talk about that and just try to hit the goal as best as you can, right? Because eventually you're going to disagree on stuff.
Yeah, I suppose it's just finding the stuff where you do agree, really, so you can kind of move the needle forward rather than, you know, butting heads all the time and try and get the best out of it.
Yeah, I think we butt heads because we feel the potential for changing the other person, and I'm not a big fan of believing that people can change. Like, and I know that doesn't sound good. People can change, but what I always say is people don't change. We grow, and we grow into better versions of ourselves, or we can grow into worse versions of ourselves. So I think knowing about who our self is vital to figuring out how to turn into like that best version.
Yeah, I think I find that, so when I'm working with that type of person, they do tend to soften a little, but they don't change who they are. They're still the same person, but they kind of soften a little, and I probably, go the other way a little.
Yeah,
So
my mom is that personality. So I really know that personality type. Well, she was a school principal, which is a very common job for that stag personality type. I think probably like, I'm guessing like 50 to 60% of school principals are stags. Because it's certain they follow a sense of authority. Chain of command is very important. Like my mom had a parking spot at her school, reserved for the principal. And I once asked her, I'm like, because we were talking about personality, and she's like, why would you say I'm like that? I'm like, because you value authority. She's like, it's not my top priority. I'm like, it's one of your top ones. And I was like, put it this way: if someone parked in your parking spot, how would you feel about that? And she was like, well, no one would do that. I'm like, see, there you go. Like that's just that assumption that no one's gonna like break your authority. Like it's so vital. And I bet you if someone did park in her parking spot, she would be very upset. Right. Whereas some personalities like, oh, okay, cool. Like, okay, I'll just park somewhere else. Is there parking somewhere else? I'll just park there, you know? So I'm pretty familiar with that type. But the thing is, my mom is familiar with me, so we don't argue. Well, clearly not anymore. But even as when I was a kid, she at a certain point she realized we were very different, and she kind of, in a weird way, left me alone. Which I always got in trouble, and for the son of a school principal, that might be a bad thing. But she kind of let me do my own thing after a while.
yeah, I like that. You learn, don't you, to live with each other, and to the people that you're around, even like subconsciously, I guess, because I've never really gone into this kind of detail where I've you know assigned a personality type to anybody or gone through it, but you kind of do adjust, your relationships over time when you're either working with people or living with people or wherever it may be.
Yeah, I think we all have this like encyclopedia of people in our head, right? I mean, how many thousands of people have you interacted with in your life, right? And that goes for everyone. And unfortunately, we're not really taught in school how to tap into that, right? We're taught like, this is algebra, this is chemistry, like this is like grammar. And it's like, yeah, but how about like people intelligence? Like that's pretty cool. And we meet people all the time. And unless you're going to like be holed up in a lab somewhere and not interacting with anyone, for the most part, our jobs are going to be revolve around people, right? And to a certain extent, at least. And at least I hope that my book, in its own way, helps people tap into that experience inside their head, so that they can start looking back and going, oh, no wonder. I remember I met this girl who was like this, and we had this problem. That's why we had it. That's where the conflict came from. Or, oh, that's why I don't get along with my parents, or that's like oftentimes parents will say, oh, then in order why that's my favorite child and that's my least favorite child. They start realizing, oh, okay, like it's just because they have similar personalities, like doesn't mean they love them less. It just means, they love them equally, I'm sure, but
I suppose it just it's that understanding, and you just have a different level of understanding of that person, really, and what they're all about. And it's maybe hard because when there's people, even for me, when there's people I don't understand, I'm trying to understand them, but it's really difficult at the start, especially until unless you can build a relationship to get them, more difficult and deeper questions to kind of build an understanding. It's really difficult to know where they're coming from, and it's easy to miscommunicate at the beginning, especially.
what do you find is like the biggest source of miscommunication? Like when you meet someone, you're like, oh, like why did we not get that? Like where do you get your lines of communication crossed oftentimes?
I think it's the lack of what's said more than anything else. So I think,
Mm.
because I have my own perspectives and my own view on the world, and people that I've met and stuff. And I guess that you kind of imprint that on a person, don't you, based on what you already know, and you're trying to figure them out. So I think you probably imprint something on them, especially at the start, and think, oh, that's this type of person. This is what they like. This is what they do. But then you could get that very wrong as well. Um, and I think if you do get it very wrong, then and that person, you've not taken the time to communicate and figure out and ask the questions to get the answers that you need, then I think that's where it happens. It's more miscommunication than what is actually said, I think.
Yeah, like you're just trying to figure. Do you ever like project yourself into people, like where you're like, oh, well, of course this person's going to be value this or like this because that's what I like, like obviously not consciously, but do you ever feel like you do it subconsciously?
I think that's my starting point all the time. I think, yeah, I just assume everybody's like me, and then I'm proven wrong, and I have to try and figure it out as I go. But that's generally how I approach things, I think. And again, it is subconscious, but I just think everybody sees the world like I see it, and then it takes me time to figure out that actually they see it a completely different way. And what way is that?
Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, if you're a shaman, that's 8%. So that means like 92% of the population is going to be not like you, right? Versus like a gatherer, I get it. Like that's why they're so like, I don't want to say they're pressuring, but like they do tend to pressure people sometimes. They're peer pressure, social pressure, because half the population is like them. So they see, and they're probably around gatherers more already. So like, let's say if 3/4 of the people you see are very similar to you, it's almost natural instinct to go like, oh, this is the right way to do it. This is normal. This is the normal. And anything that is not is abnormal, And so then of course, when they see someone who's very different, they're like, no, you got to be this way because this is what's normal. I am normal because you see all these other people, they act like me, And so I get why it happens. So part of the personality typing thing is to help them understand too, that there are very different people that they're just not seeing. But
yeah, I'm a pretty laid back person, so and it comes to the point where most of my life, especially as a child and stuff, you just fit in. You go, okay, I'll just fit in, unless there's something I strongly believe or disagree with, at which point I usually clash with people. But I've found through my life that's made it worse because I've fit in the box the entire time, fit in the box, and then there's one thing that sets me off that I can't agree with. I'll push back, and then it can make relationships really difficult then because people are like, well, all of a sudden this guy's having none of it. So
it's so funny. Sorry.
No, go on.
I was gonna say that's the description of the humpback whale in the book. Like part of it, not the whole description, but like one part of the description of the humpback whale is like they take, and then a certain moment they just explode. Like, and then people are like, oh my God, like what is going on? Like what? Like, yeah, it's like explode in such an extreme fashion, which is funny. That's exactly what you said, like box, and then boom, and then conflict, right?
Yeah, it seems to be the way through my life, and that's how it goes. But I'm trying to be a bit more open and honest about stuff now. So even though I do still fit in a box a lot of the time, I explain that I'm just fitting in the box, and this is what I really think or how I feel, and I find that actually works better, and I feel better about myself because I'm actually expressing what I feel like or who I really am. But then also, if there's a bit of conflict later on, it's not completely out of the blue, so people know, well, actually, this is born from a number of steps that's got us to this point.
Yeah, they should know. They should know by now, right? That's how. Yeah, I mean, that's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just saying, like.
Sorry. We do it again. Again. You go. I'll say.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's exactly like my relationship. What I was mentioning with my mom is like, conflict early on, right? But I was pretty vocal, so I established very early on that I was like, no, this is what I like. This is what I do. I don't like that, And obviously, you have conflict with someone, especially when they have authority over you. But the good thing about that is, as you get older, at a certain point, there's like, okay, like now I can do. I mean, when I was in my teens, finally I could do just different stuff because she's like, okay, well, that's how he is. I can't like, what am I going to do about that? Like, it was not a surprise, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. That's that regular, frequent conflict, the little bit, because you can learn to understand each other that way and develop the relationship that way. Whereas I was avoiding the conflict all the time, and then have one big conflict, and then it makes it almost more difficult to deal with, which I've learned now, and I'm trying to express by any dissatisfaction and stuff earlier on in the process, so that when it gets to a point where I'm really enthusiastically upset about something or enthusiastically disagree with something, then it's not a shock that, oh, I thought you were okay with it, or you fit in this box and you were happy enough. So that's what I'm trying to do anyway.
I think that's cool too, because it like has faith in the people you're with, whether it's like on a romantic level or just a friendship level or a familial level, right? Like you have faith that just because I established this early that I'm different in this way and I have a different viewpoint on this, it has faith in them that they're like, oh, that's cool. Like it's all good. Like we don't have to like agree on everything. Right. Versus like hiding it. And then when you come out, they might be offended and might get mad, or like there might be a strong conflict, not because they're not okay with you being that way, but because you were hiding it, right? You're like, it's more the surprise than anything else, right? Wait, you were lying to me this whole time? Like, why were you, like, it's cool, like, be yourself. Like, there might be a little of that too, which is good. I think that's healthy.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a better approach than it was, where you because obviously you still feel them things even if you're not showing it or don't tell people. So you might as well, in a respectful way. Obviously, I'm not talking about just shouting at people or losing your head or anything. And it's always in a respectful way, but it's just having that courage to go, okay, we'll agree to disagree. This is what I think, and then just leaving it at that.
Yeah, I think being yourself is probably the number one thing that's the only thing we can count on, right? Is finding ourselves and then trying to be ourselves, right? Like, because everything else we don't have any control over. So, you might as well. I don't know if you watch professional or NFL football, but they have like a thing that they always tell the wide receiver, because the wide receiver is always going down the middle. And sometimes when they go down the middle, they're going to get hit. They're going to get hit hard, and they're not going to see it coming because they're focused on catching the ball. And I feel like that's the same way with life. It's like they always say, you might as well catch the ball because you're going to get hit either way, right? Whether they drop it or catch it, they're going to get hit. So I think that's a lot like life. You're going to have conflict no matter what. We're going to get hit with people who are very different than us. So we might as well catching the ball, meaning we might as well just be ourselves, as opposed to trying to be something else.
Absolutely. And if you learn to have conflict in a healthy way, then actually it benefits you through life anyway.
Yeah, right. our whole world is based on conflict already, right? Like, I learned that in screenwriting. That's what they said. No one wants to read a script about the village of the nice, happy people. We want to see conflict because we know deep down inside that's pretty much like our world. It's just a mirror.
Absolutely. How about writing a book then, Eric? How did you find that? Is that the first book you've ever written?
Yeah, it's a funny story how it came about. So I had that method. I had the methodology all written out, and I had it on a website. And I used that with my education company, but I never thought about actually having a book. And then I kind of shuttered my education company and went back to trying to write and sell screenplays and, television pilots. I grew up in Los Angeles, went to UCLA. It's just all around us here. And so I joined like a writer's group. And in this writer's group, we would go to the bar afterwards. We'd have the session where we write, and then we go to the bar and just, talk and stuff. And I brought up the personality types, the animals, and it just like caught on really fast. Like, people just like talking about themselves, right? And the animals are fun. Like, oh, what type am I? What animal am I? Oh, I'm a fox. Oh, yeah, foxes love being foxes, obviously, And a friend of mine was like, hey, you should really write a book on this. And I was like, no, I'm still gonna write this pilot that I'm working on. I think I was working on a pilot about like a rabbit that was a sex addict, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna work on this. I'm gonna try to sell this. And so what ended up happening was she took the ideas of my personality typing ideas and then put it into the show that she was writing for. So she was working on this show on Apple TV, and on the episode that she was working on, she put it in there. Like they're doing, like, the characters take a test at work and they get these different animals, And I'm like, well, okay, now that you put it on your show and it seems like people like it and it's entertaining enough, I guess I probably should write a book. So anyway, then I wrote the book, and it didn't take too long because I pretty much had all the ideas structured in my head and on the website. So, yeah. And then a few months later, I finished it. And then I obviously went through the process of getting an agent and getting a publisher and all that, which is not fun. And that takes quite a while, but the writing part is fun. That is really fun.
Did you have to change your style from screenplay, I take it, to writing this book?
It's funny. Like, I kept my voice. Well, I'm always, obviously, when I coach writing, always like, find your voice. And I think when people read my book, they'll clearly know my voice, which is like kind of like an asshole a little bit, but like funny and like sarcastic. And that's just the way I talk. And so it's very clear it's in there. So in a weird way, I think the voice writing even a nonfiction book like that was very similar to how I write screenplays, in that it's just like your voice amped up to 100, right? Like, how can you be the most punchy and pithy and engaging while telling about this kind of content that can be sometimes a little wonky and a little nerdy and a little theoretical. So I always try to make it at least as funny as possible. I use a lot of like pop culture references that I know when people read it, people are not going to get every single reference, which is why we have footnotes. But there's a lot of random stuff. Like, I might mention like I don't know, Depeche Mode in one sentence and then mention scatology in a sentence, you know, like, and people are just gonna have to follow that.
Yeah, I suppose it's got to be quite difficult as well to get, because obviously you're delivering a non-fiction book with facts and everything else to keep that creative element and that interest really. Because I read a lot of non-fiction books, and some of them can be really engaging and brilliant, and then others can be really tedious read if they're just super focused on just the factual stuff, and it can be a really difficult read.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you were saying before, how you've changed your methodology in terms of like establishing who you are first so that people aren't surprised when like maybe something else comes up that's very true to you, right? And I think if you just establish very early on your voice in the book, and I established it pretty early on in the preface, like I'm not really taking this, I am taking it seriously, but not in the way I express it. So I might express a serious concept through a dick joke, like that might be something I'll do, and I think if you establish it early, then people won't be surprised when it comes up later, and they'll just expect it all the way through, and people might read and go, this is not scholarly, this is lightweight. And I'm like, I don't really care. Like who buys scholarly academic papers anyway? Those are boring to read. And oftentimes they don't really teach us anything.
No, usually that's for students, right? And even they don't want to read them.
Yeah. And everyone knows, what do we learn in college? Really nothing. I mean, all the stuff we learn is like from other things, right? Not necessarily like just the theory that we're reading off of our like class assignment.
Yeah, I've always struggled to read, just like textbooks and stuff like that. It's really been difficult for me. And again, goes back to how I was at school, really. And I just wouldn't do anything at home. It would just be because I learned better from engaging in class where stuff is happening and things are going on. That's kind of how I learned.
Yeah, no, I was the same. And I always I was one of those students, right? And I'm probably sure you can empathize with this, where if you're really into it, then it's amazing how much work you'll do on that assignment because you're not thinking, right? You're just like, oh, this is fun. Like, or this is like really like interesting. Let me just do it. And then, but if something's really tedious, it could be for me, it could be the smallest thing. But if it's really tedious, I have a pretty hard time doing it. Like my brother always says, it's a really good description of me actually, because he told me a friend of mine once, because my friend of mine was asking him, hey, has Eric done his taxes yet? My friend's a CPA, or he was a CPA. And my brother's like, if it takes longer than 15 minutes and he doesn't want to do it, then he's not going to do it. And I'm like, wow, that's actually a pretty good description of me. Like if it's long, like I'll do anything if it's shorter than 15 minutes. But if it's not tolerable and it's longer than 15 minutes, I might not get done, which is kind of a terrible thing to say. But
no, I'm completely with you on that. I'm like that with anything. I'll put off if it's something I don't want to do, I have no interest in it, I will put it off and put it off and put it off, and I'll only do it when I absolutely have to, when there's a deadline or something coming up.
And that's why we need other personality types, right? Because other personality types, they will do the things that they don't want to do because that's just in their nature. They're gonna be like, I don't want to do this, but that's what makes me strong, is my willingness to do the things that are not particularly fun. Like there are personality types that love doing the dishes, and not because they love it, but because the dishes have to get done by someone. So they're just like, well, I'll do it. And if you take away, you're like, oh no, let me do the dishes for you. They'll actually get mad. They'll be like, no. You're trying to tell me that I can't do the dishes, that I'm incapable of doing this? No, I can do it. So I always tell, like, if you're like a beaver personality type, you tell the beaver personality type, you don't try to do the work for them. You just tell them that you appreciate them for doing the work, and then they love it.
Yeah, I like that. I personally, in my last job, I had to use an Excel. So to give you an example, I had an Excel spreadsheet, and I used to have to go through the spreadsheet and review these incidents, right? My colleague would do it, alphabetical or whatever it is, through the order, going through. I couldn't do that. I'd start with good intentions to do it that way, and then what I would do is I'd get bored. They'd all be the same work essentially, or very similar, but I'd get bored of just going down the list, and in the end I'd just pick random ones off the list. So I'd go to the bottom and start from the bottom up. I'm so chaotic with stuff like that, and I don't know why, but that's just the way I operate.
You're just like, screw it, I'm just gonna, who's gonna notice anyway?
I don't know what it does to me, if it gives me some sort of, makes it fresh, I don't know, but that's how I operate.
I love that you said chaotic and chaos, because I do think that's a defining feature within the shaman type of the humpback whale. they're the most chaotic of the shamans. Because as I was telling you before, sometimes the question I ask to figure out what shaman type you are is I ask like, oh, were you a good student? Right. And generally it doesn't mean you weren't a good student, but you didn't automatically say yes. You're more like, and then the moment someone says, then they have to think about it, because then they're starting to think of the nuances. What does it mean to be a good student? Was I don't know. But if you were just like automatically, yeah, I was a good student, it would be on another side of the shaman types. And because for their mind, they're not particularly chaotic. So they're good students because they feel they have the same motivations as a humpback whale in terms of self-knowledge, having people understand themselves, but they're definitely going to work more in systems and institutions. They'll be your teachers. They'll be your teachers who might have a nervous breakdown because their philosophy kind of differs from the gatherer philosophy, but they still love it and they still need to be around kids or people in a very organized setting. But yeah, so anyway, that was a long way of saying, yeah, chaotic, that fits perfectly with humpback whale.
Yeah, that's not me. That's not me. The being in organized situations, I'm big fan of the chaos. I thrive in it.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine, he's a humpback whale, and I always describe him, yeah, he's a vagabond. And he's like, yeah, I am. And sometimes some people might like think of that as a diss or something, but it's not, right? It just means like nothing is ever structured. It's like every day is different, and that's the beauty of the day, is that, okay, what do I do today? I'm gonna do this. I don't know, like float around. Everything is different. There's nothing like your yearly or your life plan is not all structured out, right?
I don't think anything's structured out for me, to be honest. That's how bad I am. I'm terrible. I just about managed to keep a calendar going for this.
Well, yeah, I'm not the most structured either, so I'm glad that you have emails. And I just literally, it's like the least organized way possible. But I have my emails. I'm like, okay, I know where's the link. Where's the link? I know it's going to be in this like file folder, and that's it. I just boop, and then I do have a calendar. That's like the two things that I have is like I'll put things on a calendar and then I'll look at it every week. But that's about as structured as I get.
Yeah, well, I like the calendar for this because it sends me email reminders. People book into it, so I don't even have to do that part of it, and I just let it be. It works for me. It works.
And at the end of the day, it makes us stronger to not have to worry about those things if they're not something that is good for us, right? Like if that's not like a strength of ours, then why worry about that kind of thing? Focus on the things that you're really good at, because you can put maximum effort in those things, and it's just better, right? Like, if you have Michael Jordan on your team, you don't tell him to focus on getting rebounds, even though he actually did get a decent amount of rebounds. But no, you tell him lock down your man defensively and score 36 points a game.
Yeah, I think and it comes back to it, doesn't it? And that's why your book is an important piece of literature really for people to help them understand themselves, because then you can find these, because especially in the modern world, there's a lot of technology out there that can help us with the bits we struggle with to enable us to do more of what we're really good at.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we need to find that. I always say find your anchor first. Once you find your anchor, then you can find out your weaknesses, and then you can work on those weaknesses, right? But you don't want to work on those weaknesses until you have your anchor, because then there's the danger of you becoming something you're not, right? Because you start working on your weaknesses, you start saying, oh, maybe I should be like this. And it's like, that shouldn't be the way it is. You are this, but being this has some weaknesses, and then maybe you can borrow from some of the things on the outside to like improve yourself. Maybe get a little bit more organized, use a calendar or use the Riverside thing, like notifications, like technology, right? That's okay. But you're not saying like that's your favorite aspect of the process.
Yeah, it's about just kind of owning who you are and getting those things in place to help you, really. I'm really conscious of the time, Eric, because I know you've got other commitments.
Oh, yes.
Where can people find your book?
You can buy it. I guess they always say anywhere you buy a book. So, I mean, Amazon, if you want to give Jeff Bezos your money, Amazon.com. I have links on my website as well. It's weird. I have two websites. It's kind of odd. One is because it's a WordPress site, and it was the one that I created in the beginning, even before I wrote the book. And on that website, you can actually take a test to see what animal personality type you are. Now, I will say buying the book is better and figuring out there, because obviously a test is just a test. It's just a cookie cutter test. But you can find the test at utopiaproject.com. That's YOU, like YouTube, utopiaproject.com. And then if you want to find more about my life coaching and about the book, it's at projectutopia.com. And once again, you can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or anywhere online that you buy books.
No problem. I'll drop the links in the show notes, so it'll be easier for people to find you as well. Have you got any final thoughts or anything you want to leave us with, Eric?
I guess the only one is like, be yourself and be proud of yourself and find what makes you happy and do that. Simple as that.
Love it. Thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Aaron.
No problem. Right. That's it for us for now. We'll be back very, very soon. Take care.